Panzer Clash starter set. This is all you need to get started playing Panzer Clash, which is a rethemed version of a game that came out some time ago. That game is called Elemental Clash, and I haven't played it, so I cannot compare. But I was curious about this rethemed version because it is about World War II, and I'm always curious about games about World War II. This is a two-player game. It is a card game where players will use their cards to build combat units and to purchase several types of advantages. However, the game also has a tactical aspect because once you start using some of your cards as combat units, then you move them on a board where they interact with one another, and they also interact with the terrain where they are. So this is the general idea. Let's see how the game plays. The game comes with 40 terrain cards. At the beginning of each game, you shuffle the cards and you place 20 on the table in 4 rows of 5 cards each. Then you also have a deck for the allies and a deck for the Axis. In the starter deck, you have decks of 40 cards per player. And if you also include expansion packs, then you can have larger decks. At the beginning of the game, the players can select their decks. Some people call this deck building, but I don't believe it is the case. This is really deck selecting, which is a slightly different mechanic. Anyways, at the beginning of the game, you select your deck if you have enough packs of cards to actually be able to do so. Then during the game, you will have a hand of 7 cards. And during a turn, well, the first thing you do in a turn is you draw a new card. Then some of the cards are factories, some of the cards are other actions, units, effects. During your turn, you can place a factory on the table in this invisible line right in front of the terrain. Each turn you can place 1 factory. If you already have factories in play, in future turns your new factories can be added in another slot, or they can be added on top of the factories that are already there to make larger stacks of factories. After you play a factory, you can play as many other cards from your hand as you want to and as you're able to build. As you can see, cards have a cost there that goes from 1 to 3, and you need to have factories of the right size in order to build certain things. For example, if I want to play this card here or this card here, I need to have a stack of 2 factories together. Then I can play a 2 value card and I place it there. I just built it. Yay! Suppose I also had a factory there, then I would also be able to build this other card here. Once you have units on the table, you can move them on the territory. Units have a movement value, and that is the number of cards on which the units can move. You cannot move diagonally. Anytime that you enter a new terrain card, you just flip it and you see what happens. And as you go, the terrain will become more interesting because you will reveal different types of terrain that may affect movement, may affect combat, may give defense or attack advantage to certain units that are on those cards. Some units have range attack. That means that instead of attacking normally, they can just inflict that value on any unit in play or on the player's supply, and that is represented by the player's stack of cards. Otherwise, units can attack adjacent unit. When an attack is declared, both the attacker and the defender attack each other. Units have an attack value and a defense value, and it is pretty simple. You will subtract the attack value of the attacker from the defense value of the defender. In this case, this unit will subtract 2 points from the defense of that unit, and yes, you will need counters to keep track of the defense points that are left. That guy has 1 defense point left, and this tank inflicts 4 points of damage on that unit. That only has 2, so that unit is eliminated. And sometimes you will have terrain that will modify the attack and or defense values in play, but not in this case. And this is pretty much how combat works. When your units reach the opposite line from where they started from, that is, when they reach the area in front of the enemy factories, then they can use their attack power to attack the enemy supplies directly. So they can inflict their attack damage on the deck of the opponent, and the opponent will have to discard that number of cards. The game is pretty straightforward. During the game, each turn you draw a card, then sometimes you will have to discard cards because of card effects played against you. Enemy units attacking your supplies also will force you to discard cards. You may have special effects that are particularly powerful, but they do require you to discard cards in order to use them. And then you may choose to discard cards because of that too. And you continue playing like this, trying to build units and to thin out the enemy's deck, because when a player is supposed to draw a card and doesn't have any to draw, that player is the loser and the other player, of course, is the winner. The problem that I have is that this starter set does not really allow you to get started with the game, meaning, at least for me, this set is too small to really give me a sense of how the game can play, what the real potential of the game is. Why? Well, when you read the rulebook tells you that ideally players should play with decks of 60 cards each. Well, in this starter set you have only 40 cards per player. That is a flaw. That is a considerable flaw. And in fact, the gripes that I have with this game come pretty much all from the fact that the decks that come with this game are too small, are too thin. The game is too fast. Of course, it's supposed to be a quick filler, but even for a filler, when you start playing, you just run out of cards way too soon. As soon as you start getting excited, the game is almost over. Other problem is that with decks this thin, you do not have the deck selecting option. All the games will be very similar to one another, so you really need to add more cards so that you have that strategic option to implement at the beginning of the games. Even worse than this is the luck factor, that with decks this small is magnified. In fact, if a player manages to have some units out early in the game that will inflict a considerable damage to the opponent's deck, then the deck of the opponent already becomes so thin, then the opponent may not have many chances to come back. However, even in this limited and incomplete version of the game, I can still see that the game has qualities and potentials. When things started working, when I was building my factories and sending out units and interacting with the terrain and using combat, etc., etc., I was having fun. It just didn't last too long, and the game seemed to be chaotic because in the end things did not pay off the way the players were expecting, just because, again, there was too much chaos generated by those decks that could be afflicted so much even by a relatively small amount of damage. So overall, I would say that this is a game that probably is good, probably is fun. I like to play it more, I like to try more sets. If you want to try it, I suggest that you buy not only the starter set, but also get some of the expansions, some of the factions, maybe just the Russians and the Germans, or the Americans and the Japanese. Other problem, however, is that the starter set is around $18. The expansions are around $18 each. So when you get the starter set and 2 factions, you're already around $60, which is quite an expense for a small card game, light game that you will play mainly as a 20-30 minute filler. So that may be an investment. I wish I could tell you more, but from this starter set, it's really hard to commit to more accurate opinions. Pity, because I really want to try this game, and from this starter set, I don't really have the sense that I've tried it completely entirely.